All right, so we're gonna get started in 1 minute. Before Larry gives a talk, I just want to give say thank you so much everyone for being here in the morning. I was just saying to a bunch of people outside that the whole idea of people showing up at 9:20 in the morning, like to sit down for talk, it was just like, wow, this is just absolutely phenomenal. And thank you so much for all your help and support. Not only for this DEF CON, but also for the last many years. So now I would like to give an introduction. Before I give an introduction to our next speaker, I want to give a shout out wherever he is. I want to give a shout out to Attrition, to Brian Martin, wherever he is. Certainly has done a lot certainly for DEF CON. But also for our next speaker that we have on stage. Was this recorded, by the way? Was this recorded, that last bit? All right, so hopefully he heard. Yeah, we'll give him a shout out later on social media. But it's my pleasure to introduce you, our next speaker. Our next speaker is Larry Cashdollar. And just a note, that is legitimately his real last name, Cashdollar. And you're based out of Akamai, and a good friend of everyone, this information security community for a very long time. Without much ado, everyone, ladies and gentlemen, Larry Cashdollar.
Hi. You guys having a good DEF CON? Good. I'll try and, I know, last night was like a party night, so I'll try and put some comedy into this and keep you guys awake. And I'll be awake because I've got a spotlight in my eyes. But I think Ming's trying to interrogate me up here. He's like, where were you on the night of August 5th? So anyway, so a little bit about me. I've been doing security research for, maybe since 1997. I've got over 100 CVEs to my name. I don't really count them anymore because the first couple were like children. These are just sort of like, abandoned children, I guess. I was a Unix administrator for 16 years. I used to do penetration testing in the 90s. That was back before machines were really connected to the internet. A lot of them were, you didn't have websites that were dynamic. They were all static content, so it was mostly penetration testing against servers, so you were always trying to get, a login on the server, root on the server. There was no SQL injection. There was no PHP bugs or LFI bugs or anything like that. I like writing code. I like coding in C, PHP, Perl. As Ming mentioned, I work for Akamai. I've been at Akamai for 16 years. I'm a member of their incident response team. So, assumptions. I'm going to assume that you guys know what WordPress is. I assume that everybody here is pretty familiar with WordPress and how they've got a security issue pretty much every week. I'm assuming you guys know what plugins are, cross-site scripting. I'm also assuming that you're not going to beat me up when you realize that I didn't actually succeed in this. This is a journey of success and failure, and then just realizing that the methodology is there, but the whole thing didn't quite work out the way I thought. So anyway, why cross-site scripting? So the story is, I was looking at WordPress plugins about a year ago. Akamai asked me, I told them that I was playing with WordPress plugins during one of our team meetings, finding security vulnerabilities in them. And they thought that it would be a good idea if I did that as part of my day job. They're like, why don't you do this stuff during the day? You don't have to hide it at night. You don't have to be ashamed of your research at night. And I said, well, I didn't want to use Akamai resources to do my own stuff. And they're like, no. You do this stuff. We're sanctioning it, and we'll pay you for it. So do this during the regular work hour. This is cool stuff. We want you to write about it and post it in the State of the Internet report and write blogs and stuff. So I'm like, okay. So I was focused on finding local file inclusion, remote file inclusion, SQL injection. I didn't care about cross-site scripting because I'm a shell guy. I like popping shells. I like getting a web shell or a root shell or just a command shell in general. I don't like the social engineering part of things. I don't like to have to get someone to click a link in order to exploit them. I want to just exploit them without them knowing. Or I guess you don't. If they click a link, they're not going to know they get exploited anyway, but I don't want to rely on someone to click something for me to get something done. I want to do it all on my own, so I always want a shell. And I kept seeing these GET requests, these POST requests, blatantly echoing variables back to the browser window. And I just would skip them. I'm like, I'm not going to bother with that. It's just cross-site scripting. I don't care. You know, it's not going to get me a shell. Who cares? It's not SQL injection. It's not fun enough to document. And after a while, I got so sick of seeing them everywhere. I'm like, that's it. I'm like, I'm going to start documenting these things, and I want to see if I can automate documenting these vulnerabilities and documenting generating the proof of concepts on the fly. And I thought that these were a sure thing. I figured if you're echoing, you know, $get out in PHP, it's going to be cross-site scripting. We'll get to that later. So I thought to myself, I want to do this automated. I just want to download all the plugins. I want to download every single plugin they have, and I'll just, you know, bang on the plugin site for WordPress and, you know, just suck everything off the repository for their plugin code. Well, after about 4 days, WordPress got pissed off. They blocked my IP address for about 8 months. I kept checking like every day for about a week, and then I checked like every week for about a month, and then I stopped checking for months, and then I happened to check after, I think it was, I don't know, 6 months, still blocked. 2 months later, unblocked. So about 8 months. The problem with this methodology that I had was the repository had all of the trunks, the tags, the cruft, old versions, versions I didn't want. I only wanted the latest plugin. I didn't want to find a vulnerability in a plugin that was already patched because I had the older version on my system. And I also wanted to collect the metadata. I wanted, you know, stuff that would be of use, like number of downloads or the author of the plugin. So, you know, my eventual thought was to automate notifying these guys that I had found a cross-site scripting vulnerability in their code. So I had to go about this a different way. So instead of downloading all the plugins over using my IP address and slamming their repository, I used the list from the repository as an index. So I took the list and I wrote a quick shell script to just wget everything, and then piped it all through proxy chains so they couldn't block my IP address anymore. Yay, Tor! Thanks, Tor. It was great because I didn't care if I had anything sensitive going over it. I just wanted the data. So I let it run for about 5 days. My wife and son probably wondered why the internet was kind of slow for a week. I told them it was me. They probably expected it. I do that stuff all the time. But so once I get all of these plugins downloaded, I decided to start, you know, cross-site script mining. So I dug up an old Perl script, and I started just looking for, you know, easy patterns, low-hanging fruit. Get request, post, regular request. And I try to just find some variations in that. You know, sometimes plugin authors would put a space in there. Sometimes they would use a quote or a double quote. Sometimes they would put, you know, 2 spaces. So I was trying to just get as many as I could, but I wasn't too worried about leaving a few behind. So while I was doing this, the same script would document the line number of where the code had this vulnerability in it, and it would automatically generate based on that variable in that cross-site scripting, or automatically generate that with using that variable in the post or get or echo or a request header, or not header, but it would use the variable in that echo or post to automatically generate the proof of concept that I was going to try, and it would document the title, which was just a generic title of you know, cross-site scripting vulnerability in plugin XYZ, and it would also collect the vulnerable variables because there were more than one cross-site scripting vulnerabilities in any given plugin. Some of them had 2, 3, 4 instances of cross-site scripting. So I tried to collect them all as best I could, and then generate a proof of concept with just one of them. So to automatically generate the cross-site scripting proof of concept, I initially just started with the get and request only. I didn't want to try, doing posts because those would be harder to exploit automatically. So I figured I would just try and, push an alert pop-up box with just a general script, tag and alert code, and then I had, the script built, and then I needed to know where I could store all of this. I had figured I'd just, at first I had created a flat text file, and that just wasn't going to work. I had, 900 vulnerabilities with 900 untested proof of concepts that I had generated on the fly, and I needed some way to sort these things and go through them. So I decided to build a MySQL database. I figured I'd just use MySQL. I had to determine what columns to use. I figured I'd just go real basic. I'd store the title, the plugin name, file, vulnerable code, proof of concept, date, just the basics. I figured if I had the basics, I could collect more metadata later, populate more fields based on what information I had in the database, and just rerun scripts and just stuff things in the database as I needed. At this point, I thought to myself, I probably should start telling people about what I'm doing, because if this actually turns out to be legit, I can't just drop 1,352 vulnerabilities on the folks at WordPress. They're probably going to either send an assassin squad after me, or they're just going to either ignore me, or I'm going to get some hate mail, or a pipe bomb in the mail or something. I don't know. So I ended up running the scripts for the post request also. Figured I'd just generate everything I could, and I realized I was over my head. I'm like, I have all of these vulnerabilities. There's over 1,000 of them. I need to start telling people who normally deal with this sort of thing. What kind of vulnerability researchers or what kind of people could I contact? And I thought of, Jericho at attrition.org, because he's been indexing vulnerabilities for, 20 years or so. I figured I would talk to MITRE just in case, the CVE guys, because I thought that I should let them know that I might be asking for 1,300 CVE numbers, which I figured they'd just ignore me, which they did. Or they... Oh, all right. All right, yeah, I'll catch up with you guys. So if I'm not here tomorrow, look in that guy's trunk. Oh, jeez. Multiple trunks. So I talked to Scott Moore, at IBM X-Force, because he's been an old friend, and he's been indexing my vulnerabilities for a long time also. So I talked to Ryan Dewhurst for WordPress vulnerability database, and I said, look, guys, I'm like, can you hold my hand? I'm kind of lost here. I found all this stuff. I don't know how to handle it. I need help. I told Akamai. I talked to Solar Designer about on the OSS security list. I'm like, I might have to put 1,300 vulnerabilities on the open source security list. How do you want me to format that? I can't send 1,300 of these things, one email at a time. That would be I'd be a prick if I did that. So we worked out this whole system for putting one line per plugin per proof of concept exploit, and we would split it up in 4 emails. I had written a bunch of Perl scripts to get this done, was testing the mail. Anyway, so I thought I had, these 1,352 vulnerabilities. I started to export them to various databases. I got a Skype call from a group of researchers in Germany. They're like, we've been looking for someone to find 0 days in plugins because we want to track how long it takes for a plugin to be discovered to how long it's being abused in the wild. So this is great. You have all of these 0 days. You haven't shared them with anybody except, a handful of people. We want to tie you into our research, and, would you send us the database? I'm like, sure. I sent them the database. I sent them the PHP code. I was creating custom CSV files for people. I was like a kid in a candy store. I'm like, oh, you want some free candy? Here you go. Here's the data. Play with it. Let me know what you think. It's not going to go public for another month or two. I sat with Jericho. Well, I didn't sit with him, but we talked over email for a couple of days, massaging the database. We were fixing mangled entries. He was giving me suggestions on what data to store because I pretty much built a vulnerability database out of all of these cross-site scripting things, and he was the man who knew how to index this stuff. And hence, they wanted more columns, so I was adding more columns to the database. I was adding, I wanted to, add a spot for CV IDs. I figured I would self-assign CV IDs for MITRE just so I had a number that I could associate them with, and not try and get those guys to do that stuff. People also wanted, what kind of what type is this? Is this a GET request? Is this a POST request? Does it use non-C? I also created an auto-verify field because I was intending on trying to figure out if I can, verify these things automatically and then know that for sure they're legit cross-site scripting vulnerability. And I wanted a contact date because I was gonna try and do this responsibly. I was gonna contact vendors and say, look, I have a vulnerability in your code. Can you fix it? And then store the date. And I had the file name with the full path because I would need that later on in my research to try and verify this stuff. And I wanted to validate the proof of concepts. I wanted to make sure that if it was legit, that it was documented legit with a proof of concept. It wasn't just hearsay or I suspect. It was real cross-site scripting vulnerability, and I wanted to have it in the database so that I had 1,300 vulnerabilities and 1,300 exploits because I thought that'd be really cool. And I had an idea on how I was going to test this. I had been thinking about it for a few days and decided I had this clear path to trying to exploit these things automatically. So I tried auto-exploit. My idea was to send the auto-generated payloads to vulnerable plugins. I was going to use CGI bin. I was going to use PHP CGI to execute the PHP code and render the HTML with the JavaScript payload inside of it. The JavaScript payload, I thought, would be just an image request to grab a script that would just be a number on the end, which was the vulnerability number, that would set the auto-verify to 1 in the database, just saying that the JavaScript fired and that it was legitimately executing in the browser, and that was a legit cross-site scripting vulnerability, and it was proven. So for the automatically generating the HTML, I set up a CGI environment, set up the environment variables. So you need to have these populated. You had to have the CGI stuff set up, redirect status. The request method would be automatically changed depending on whether it was a GET or a request or a POST eventually. And then the query string was just my payload with just a generic cross-site scripting payload, just an alert box. And so it was a simple script. It's just a simple basic bash script that would just set up the environment and that I could just feed from the database. I could feed the PHP file that was vulnerable, and I could feed the payload that I wanted to use with the specific vulnerability ID number in the set for the variable for the payload. It was a two-step process. I had to first render the HTML, and then I had to actually run that HTML through PhantomJS to exec the JavaScript. And once I could do that, I could find out, if this thing was going to even work. I wasn't sure if this was going to work or not. I thought it might. And I ended up pulling down PhantomJS. I don't know if folks are not familiar with PhantomJS. It's just a full stack web browser. It's headless though, so you pretty much tell it to do something, and it will spit out an HTML file or an image file of what it got back. And I found this scander JavaScript code that somebody had written that would take a directory as an argument and then render all of the HTML files in it as if it had gone through a browser and spit out an HTML file and a PNG file of the results, which was perfect. This is exactly what I needed. So I set this thing all up, and I'm about to hit enter, and I'm like, I wonder if this is going to work. I'm sure someone else might have tried this, but this was my idea, and I figured I would give it a whirl. And so I hit enter, and I start tailing the Apache access log. And it's working. I'm seeing stuff come in. Stuff's firing off. I'm seeing, my logs are starting to scroll, and I'm like, holy crap, this is actually going to work. I might have, 1,300 of these vulnerabilities with proof of concepts. Jericho's going to buy me a beer. He'll buy me a beer the next time he sees me if this thing works. And so then, I start examining the results, and I'm like, I have all of these results files in here, and I can see where all of the code has been executed in the PNG files. You could see where you had like error 500, and then more error 500s, and then like I saw legitimate cross-site scripting in there, and then another error 500. I'm like, I wonder what this really boils down to. So I go through and I start looking at the results. 38 of them fired off. I'm like, that's kind of low. And at this point, I realized something went horribly wrong. Something's not right. There should have been, I thought, maybe 200 of them, maybe, would have fired off as automatic. So I thought, well, perhaps they all need authentication. Maybe these things need to be authenticated in order for the vulnerable code to be reached. But, I realized it worked. It actually did work. So something went right, but something's still wrong. There's something that's broken. So then, I started to sit down and just think about what I had done and what my results meant. I figured, if the JavaScript execution was successful, then I know that the proof of concept that I generated is working, that little snippet of Java payload was actually escaping the tags properly, that I was actually getting somewhere, and the automatic generation of that thing actually worked. And then, I realized that you don't need to be authenticated if it did work, so these were legitimately unauthenticated cross-site scripting vulnerabilities. And I knew that the injection point, wasn't sanitized, and I knew the code wasn't just defined in a class I couldn't reach, because if it's stuck in a class and that class isn't being loaded, you can't execute it. And then, if the JavaScript didn't execute, I thought perhaps the injection point was being sanitized and I had missed it somehow, or the code required authentication like admin rights or regular login user rights for an author for WordPress. And then perhaps the proof of concept needed to be tweaked. It wasn't escaping the HTML tags properly. So I thought, at this point I thought, maybe there was some hope. I'm like, maybe the proof of concepts need to be reworked and tweaked, and I might have more of a success rate. So then I started looking at the environment I had built and realized I had screwed up. I didn't have WordPress actually loaded. This thing was just executing these PHP files, but these PHP files might be relying on other PHP snippets to work properly. They might be including pieces of other plugins. They might be including pieces of WordPress. And if that's the case, I'm just going to get an error 500. It's not going to even run. So those weren't even valid tests. And I didn't have the entire plugin copied. These snippets of code are from plugins that rely on other pieces of code in that plugin, and I didn't have that plugin available. So when the PHP executed and it went out to include another file and that file didn't exist, it blew up. It just didn't matter. It didn't even execute. It just broke and gave me error 500. And then another thing I realized is that some of these plugins were setting the content header so that they wouldn't be vulnerable to cross-site scripting, and PHP 5 doesn't set the headers. It just renders it was just rendering the HTML, but not actually setting a header because it's CGI. It's on a command line. It's not a full stack web server. And then the real kick to the head was that I found out that WordPress escapes the get, post, and request variables. I didn't know this. I ended up finding this out maybe, I don't know, 2 or 3 days after I ran into this problem and was just mulling it over like, why didn't this work? And then I thought to myself, perhaps the folks at WordPress knew this, which is why they sort of were dragging their feet on acknowledging the 1,352 vulnerabilities. Maybe they did, maybe they didn't. I know that it pretty much messed up the research that I was doing because I didn't figure this out before getting too far with this. So in the code, if you look at the code and the WordPress load file, you could see where it takes the get variable and the post and the cookie and the server, the GPCS variables, and just runs them through add magic quotes. So what this did was it screwed up my payload so that I couldn't break out of the HTML tags, and pretty much rendered a lot of the cross-site scripting vulnerabilities unexploitable. So I was actually pretty sad. This was really an annoying thing that I had run into. So I went back and I managed to go and verify that 27 of these automatically were, the proof of concept was generated, the vulnerability was verified, and it actually worked. So 27 were fully automated, generated vulnerabilities with proof of concepts and verification of that vulnerability. And then 3 I manually validated. Some of the payloads needed tweaking. I think they needed another variable to be set in order to reach the vulnerable code in that PHP file, which I was able to figure out once after a manual code review. And there were false positives too. I had found, some places in the code that had, made sure that the variable was an integer, which, broke the cross-site scripting. So at this point, I was, my cool kid status was pretty low. I thought that this was going to be something that I could submit to like DEF CON, which I'm here. So I guess it kind of worked. But it was just a real disappointment. I thought that this was going to be a really cool example of how to automate this stuff, and then I thought perhaps this could be something that folks could use and pick up and start using to find their own security holes automatically. So what I learned, and I think this is probably the most important slide, at least for me, was I should have tested stuff end to end. I shouldn't have tried to cut corners and make things quicker and just think that I was going to be smart by using PHP CGI or CGI execution. I should have built a full working Apache installation with WordPress and installed the plugins myself and then done the testing that way. I'm not sure how I would install 1,352 plugins, but it would have probably had better results than this did. And when you see odd results, you got to research them. Why am I getting this extra character in here when I shouldn't be seeing anything? Why isn't this working? It's investigate. If it doesn't make sense, you got to look deeper. I never thought in my mind that someone would be doing something you're not expecting, like escaping global variables. I would have never thought that anybody would be doing that. It just never occurred to me, and I was dead wrong. WordPress was doing it. They're escaping everything I needed to break out of those HTML tags and actually make this thing work. So it tripped me up. It made everything context dependent. So stuff like this, I could still get working with cross-site scripting because it wasn't being escaped out of any HTML. I could just HTML doesn't care if there's quotes or double quotes in there. It'll still, or JavaScript will just render. We can still use our regular payload, but most of these were like this, context dependent. You had, all the stuff that was being stuck in there that I was trying to escape out of. You could see in the, well, you can't see it too well, but it was escaping the double quotes, and that's why my payloads weren't firing. So you'd need to know where the injection point was, and you'd need to know if there's a way around it. And in some cases there wasn't, and their escaping was just rendering stuff unexploitable. So yeah, the next step would have been vetting all that cross-site scripting. I would need to manually review the remaining entries. I'd have to go through each one and see where it was in the code, if it was something I could escape, if it's something I couldn't escape, if it was something that was required another variable to be set in order to reach the vulnerable code and it was legit. There was no way I was going to take the time to do this. This would have been a huge undertaking even for a large team. I mean, you'd need a bunch of guys to go through this, and it would just be too much work. And I started dreaming about cross-site scripting. I was having like nightmares about PHP and plugins and cross-site scripting, and I'd wake up thinking about cross-site scripting bananas and just like bizarre things in my head that it just spent too much time looking at code and thinking about this stuff. So I decided it was time to wrap this up and just document what I had done and see if other people could use it. I'm pretty much done with WordPress plugins for now. I think I'm sore at them for doing the context or the escaping of the global variables. I think that's an evil thing to do. So I don't want to look at it anymore. I thought about possibly looking at stuff like look for SQL injection this way. It could be applied to other functions in PHP that might be prone to abuse by a developer or misused by a developer. Maybe look for some command injection stuff with this. Other content management systems, Joomla, I realized doesn't escape super globals. I started poking at that one. That might be kind of fun to play with. Drupal has a nice listing of all of its extensions on that HTTPS link, so that's another starting point. Maybe I might poke at that, or other people can. Actually had a researcher who's actually in this room, if he wants to stand up and say hello. Looking at you, Brute. He's super tall. He's an expert of cross-site scripting. I saw a talk of his and he blew my mind, but he actually saw my technique when we were both speaking at the same B-Sides or Boston B-Sides conference, and he ended up writing his own scripts to do what I did and found a whole bunch of vulnerabilities himself, and so it was sort of a success because now he's able to use this technique and start finding stuff and probably have more success than I did. And then I started seeing vulnerabilities that I had discovered 2 or 3 months ago, starting to show up by the guys who are running the Summerpwnage. They were starting to publish stuff on full disclosure, and I actually told them, like, hey, I found that about 2 or 3 months ago in this database that I had built, but I never documented it or wrote a proof of concept. And I said, it's cool that you guys are finding this stuff, and it's your vulnerability. I'm glad you found it and you actually validated it. And if you guys want my database, I'll just send it to you. If you want to look at the stuff there. So yeah, it was starting to see stuff start to pop up, and people starting to see stuff that I had found already but just didn't look at. Actually, this is kind of funny. So I have a thank you slide. I'm just thanking everybody here for just listening to me ramble about this stuff. This has been rattling around in my head for, 6 or 7 months now. And, thanks for coming to hear me talk about it. Brian Martin and Scott Moore and Ryan Dewhurst, those guys are all great and just trying to help me get this stuff sorted out. Mika at WordPress, they were very helpful initially with just saying, look, when you sent us this email, I did get a response from them. They said, when you sent us this email, we just about fell off our chairs. They thought, we have no idea how we're going to process 1,300 vulnerabilities. We do 1 or 2 vulnerabilities at a time. We have no framework for handling 1,300 of these. So they sort of just sat on it and let me know that they had it and that they were just sort of thinking about what they were going to do with it. And then I had to send them the email saying, yeah, I didn't realize you guys were escaping the global variables, and so a lot of these things are context dependent, which means that a lot of these are probably false positives. So emergency over. And then Solo Designer for taking the time to actually help me format email that I eventually sent to the OSS security list, but it only had 30 plugins on instead of the 1,300 that I thought. And then the I'm sorry slide, which is, you'll notice, is the same as the thank you slide, because I put these guys through so much and kept hounding them for information, and they were working with me only to have this small result come to fruition from it. If anybody has any questions, or these are my greet slide. If thanks to Brute Logic, who's actually here from Brazil, and thanks to everybody who showed up. I don't know what time it is. Folks have any questions or? Pretty straightforward, I think. Yeah, I can't see anything.
Hello. Can you tell us what is the timeline of all your researches related to this?
I'd say it was over a month or two. I initially started digging into things, I believe it was February, and then I realized that things didn't go as I had planned by, I'd say, late April. Yeah, this year. Last year I was looking at mostly SQL injection and remote file inclusion. Yeah, it was about 2 months, I'd say. 2 to 3 months. So.
Any other question? Any? No? No? Going once? Going twice? Well, Larry, thank you so much, my friend.
Sure.
Thank you. So, once again, Larry Cashdollar, everybody.